Night settles over Boston the way a careful clerk closes a drawer, gently, with a last look to be sure everything is where it belongs. Behind a small window on Brattle Street, two brothers set out coils of wire and a promise that modern life can be learned a piece at a time. They chose a plain, workmanlike name, borrowed from ships, RadioShack, the room at sea where messages are kept steady and voices cross long distances. On land, the words felt modest and right. In 1921, they painted them over the door and opened a counter that offered explanations as much as it offered goods. Early customers arrived with curiosity more than certainty. A pair of hands would draw a little diagram on a receipt, antenna, ground shung coil, and turn the sketch into a small paper bag that made a whole evening go differently. Confidence, it turned out, could be packaged if you treated it like a part. The mailroom learned to breathe in rhythm with the city. Catalog pages found kitchen tables far from Boston and turned them into temporary showrooms. The parcels traveled by train. The ideas traveled faster. This store had the habit of answering questions without making the asker feel small. The first decades taught a lesson that would outlive any floor plan. Technology becomes friendly when someone stands beside you for the first 5 minutes. The brothers trained clerks to listen before labeling, to offer the right piece and the little tip that kept it from going wrong later. In time, the company began to put its own names on boxes. Private labels sounded like reliable neighbors. Realistic for sound, Micronta for measuring, Archer for parts. The point was, and never glamour. It was stocking what homes could use tonight at a price that left money for supper. Some nights, the shop felt like a lighthouse for hobbyists. Ham operators compared weather and antennas in a polite code of call signs. A youth with wide eyes learned that a solder joint is mostly patience taught by heat. The counter kept both kinds of customers from talking past each other. The store's voice stayed steady as the years changed their shoes. When a question had two good answers, the clerk would explain both and let the kitchen table choose. The habit created regulars, the sort of people whose footsteps the bell could recognize before the door finished opening. A small card turned into a large memory. Once a month, you could bring it in for a free battery. One practical reason to stop by. One small reminder that a door in town still knew your name. Free wasn't the point. The point was belonging, stamped in 9 volts in cardboard. By the early 1960s, the business was respected, but tired. Shelves were too full of the wrong things. Ledgers read like weather that refused to clear. A Texan named Charles Tandy walked in with a simple cure. Go smaller to get sharper and hire people who like explaining twice without sighing. He bought the company in 1963 and made policy out of common sense. Stores would be compact, inventory disciplined, staff chosen for their kindness to beginners. House brands moved to the front, not to hide anything, but to give families a trustworthy choice without a logo tax. Under the new stewardship, the catalog became neater and the doorway more welcoming. You could find a store near a barbershop or a bakery and know it would feel like a workbench that happened to have a cash drawer. The brand learned that a helpful aisle is better than a crowded one. The battery card became a monthly habit as gentle as paying the water bill. Children carried it like a talisman and practiced saying the SIZs, AA, C, D, until the letters felt like part of the language of a home. Parents learned a subtler habit: show up before failure becomes urgent. House labels developed accents of their own. Realistic speakers didn't brag. They simply worked. Micronta meters turned guessing into measuring. Archer parts earned the right to be tossed into a kitchen junk drawer without apology. Quiet competence became the style guide. Saturday afternoons, the store looked like a cooperative without bylaws. A dad and daughter rescued a toy. A neighbor fixed a porch radio. Someone in a hurry grabbed a fuse and left with time to spare. The counter treated every errand like it mattered, because it did. By the mid-60s, a map of tidy shops stitched itself across cities and small towns. The floor plans were different, but the manners matched. Greet quickly, point precisely, show how to make a plug click twice, not once. People came to rely on that certainty the way you rely on the time a bus usually arrives. Managers learned small geography, where light fell best on the parts wall, which peg sagged, which drawer stuck halfway, and needed a thumb on the lower right to behave. The workday was a sequence of tiny stewardships that kept the store from wasting anyone's evening. Holiday seasons had their own weather. Batteries rose like brick stacks near the register, and after New Year's, the return lines felt less like complaints and more like second drafts. A good clerk turned second drafts into better stories with a grin and a fresh roll of tape. As high-fidelity systems moved into living rooms, the counter practiced a new kind of hospitality, helping families choose sound that felt like them. The advice was never poetic. It was practical. Match the room, match the budget, match the patience of the person who will dust the speakers. The catalog grew thicker, but more honest. Pages showed neat grids instead of irresistible theater. Descriptions leaned toward what a thing did and what it worked with. Readers circled items in pencil, the way you circle words in a book you want to remember. The 70s brought a different kind of curiosity through this door. People started asking about computers in a tone that mixed rumor with hope. Most machines in that era arrived as kits and instructions thick enough to require a weekend and a friend. The store wondered if there was a kinder way. A buyer with a friendly stubbornness pushed for a computer that arrived ready. No solder smoke, no bold disclaimers about what voids a warranty, just a box you could plug in and begin. Engineers went to work. The result, when it first sat on a counter, looked like a small television with opinions. Keys clicked like a polite typewriter. A cassette chattered softly when it saved a thought. A basic prompt blinked like a metronome that trusted you to learn time. Parents who came in for a fuse stayed to ask if this could help their kids see the future without being frightened by it. The machine sold in a way that surprised even optimists. Teachers brought notebooks and questions. Teenagers pulled chairs close. Grandparents stood back with arms folded and measured whether the glow meant opportunity or mischief. The store, for once, got to say both with a smile. Nobody claimed the counter invented curiosity. What it did was package curiosity with permission. Permission to try, to fail gently, to get better on a Tuesday night with a kind manual, and a clerk who would cheer without clapping. For a while, that bundle felt like the most American product imaginable. The wall of parts never stopped being important. While new screens learned to speak, old knobs still needed cleaning, old plugs still needed adapting, old toys still needed to be kept alive until birthdays. The store kept saying yes to both kinds of needs and tried not to choose between past and future. Under the new management's orderliness, the brand's promise clarified: carry the right little things, help them meet the right bigger things, and keep the tone steady. A customer might not remember a model number, but they would remember the relief of a device behaving again. Evenings ended with small routines that made mornings easier. Peg hooks straightened, drawers topped off, receipt paper tucked under the glass, manuals placed where the anxious would find courage. The work looked simple because someone decided it would be simple for the next person. If this quiet story keeps you company, leave a soft comment later telling us the one tiny fix you still remember. It helps other sleepy listeners find the next calm story when they need it, and it tells us what to keep in the drawer. The brand reached the early 1980s with manners intact and new muscle in its shoulders. It had learned to sell not just parts, but possibility, not just gadgets, but the confidence to use them. Families treated a visit like stopping by a neighbor who always had the right wrench. On paper, this looked like retail. In living rooms, it looked like evenings saved from frustration. The company's most valuable product was neither the radio nor the computer. It was the sentence people carried home: I can handle this now. From that sentence, Whole weekends learned to go better. A cassette that no longer squeaked, a TV that finally listened to its remote, a new machine that did not feel like an intruder. The door chime's little two-note greeting turned into a kind of punctuation for relief. Outside the store, the world moved faster. Malls modernized. Catalogs multiplied. Delivery trucks drew straighter lines. Inside, the counter trusted its old trick. Meet people where they are and walk one step with them toward where they want to be. It had worked since 1921, still worked. In the catalog years, the drawings did a kind of hospitality that photography couldn't. Line art left room for your imagination without lying about scale. Descriptions were written in complete sentences that presumed you could learn one more thing. People read them the way they read recipes, with confidence that the next step would be within reach. House brands made families bilingual in practicality. Realistic sounded truthful. Micronta respectful of measurement. Archer a surname you could trust to hold parts together. The labels did not hide where things came from. They made it easier to remember which box in the closet to reach for when Sunday's project resumed after lunch. A clerk taught a small class at the counter without calling it a class. How to strip a wire without nicking it. How to tell a bad solder joint by the way it looks bored. How to choose a power supply by matching what a device actually needs instead of what a shelf card suggests. These little lessons turned homes into better places to try. The battery card threaded neighbors into a schedule. People stopped in on their way to pick up dry cleaning or bread. The conversation lasted 2 minutes and meant more than $10 saved ever could. The routine told you that maintenance matters more than emergency heroics. Even when the first computers arrived, the store protected the dignity of analog life. A record player still earned a new stylus. A shortwave still deserved a fresh length of wire run along a quiet wall. The room never treated yesterday's machines as enemies of tomorrow's. A child once asked why there were so many tiny drawers. The answer was that most problems are small and precise. The wall kept proving it, and parents started to look at the room the way they looked at a good toolbox. Less like shopping, more like being prepared to be kind to the future. The 80s settle into the shelves like good weather. People come in for small rescues. An antenna that stays put in wind, a switch that clicks with conviction, a spool of speaker wire that makes a room sound honest again. The counter's manners do not change. It still treats every errand as a story worth finishing. By the early 90s, another kind of device starts knocking. Mobile phones arrive, shy and heavy, then quickly learn to be slim and persuasive. Plans, carriers, and tiny cards become part of the store's vocabulary. Clerks translate this new dialect into human, drawing little diagrams for families choosing their first shared minutes. Accessories multiply, chargers that behave, cases that forgive drops, headsets that turn commutes into private rooms. For a while, the phone aisle is a helpful wind. It fills the sails of a chain that already knows how to greet people who are half-decided, yet hopeful. Meanwhile, the rest of the store keeps its old promise. Parts, tools, and adapters hold their ground as a kind of local safety net. If you bought a radio here in 1978 and need a knob in 1993, the drawer still recognizes your problem. The brand grows into a dependable reflex. When in doubt, try the counter with the bell. Growth carries its own weather. So many locations dot so many maps that two stores sometimes watch the same street. It feels convenient until it doesn't. Rent is a patient bill, and a thin Tuesday can make a week feel longer than it is. Still, the bell rings, and the work continues. The web begins to whisper a new habit at the decade's end. Compare from the couch, decide late at night, expect a box tomorrow. The store learns to answer questions from people who have already read 10 online opinions and now want a human to confirm a choice. It tries to be both what it has always been and what the future seems to require. Then, at the turn of the millennium, The cat-shaped idea pads across the threshold. A small free barcode scanner promises to connect magazines and catalogs to the web with a swipe. On paper, it looks clever. In houses, it looks fussy. Privacy worries and awkward software turn a novelty into a lesson about forcing tomorrow before it's ready. The brand, which helped mail the gizmo to millions and printed the special barcodes in catalogs, watches the culture shrug and moves on a bit wiser. The lesson is not bitter. People accept convenience when it feels like a courtesy, not a leash. The store returns to what it knows, useful parts and clear advice delivered without theatrics, while the internet grows noisier and faster in the background. Mid-2000s afternoons sound different at the counter. A customer who once needed a universal remote now asks about smartphones. Carriers keep changing their song. Margins thin. The chain leans harder on mobile to pay the bills and finds the math less forgiving than the early years suggested. Online shopping matures into a habit, not a novelty. The brand still has the better conversation, real faces, real nods, but the screen has the better hours. When next day becomes normal, some errands that used to belong to the bell drift toward the truck. The company experiments, kiosks try new corners, campaigns try new tones. In 2009, a fresh nickname, The Shack, arrives on billboards and giant screens during a two-city stunt that links coasts with webcams. The idea is to sound modern without losing the old competence, to be familiar and suddenly new at the same time. Reactions are mixed and polite. A nickname can jog attention, but it can't stock a shelf or fix a plan. Inside the stores, the good work remains the same. Explain simply, sell what fits, and send people home with confidence instead of confusion. Outside, the world has learned to shop while standing still. Through all of this, the parts wall refuses drama. It continues to save weekends, a fuse here, a plug there, backstopping families who want old devices to behave one more season. In the balance between phones and parts, the store tries to be two kinds of helpful at once. By the end of the decade, the chain is famous for being everywhere and trusted for being practical. But the ground has shifted. Phones dominate traffic, yet leave skinny profits. Online rivals teach people to expect speed that a friendly bell cannot always match. The brand has not lost its manners, only its margin for error. A new decade waits with hard questions and, as always, lights that turn on at opening time. Not every change felt like a revolution. Many felt like better manners. Return policies were rewritten in shorter sentences. Packaging opened without requiring tools that could double as crowbars. Staff learned to translate carrier rules into house rules a person could remember without a spreadsheet. In the same decade, the catalog took a last graceful bow. Readers who had circled items in pencil for years eased into screens without much ceremony. The website learned the old habit of speaking plainly. What it is, what it works with, what not to try. For a while, customers would bring printouts to the counter like they once brought clippings. The parts wall stayed a neighborly safety net. A family could pick up a tiny adapter and delay a big purchase by a season. A teacher could revive lab gear with a fuse and make the budget breathe easier. The room kept proving that small, exact things change moods faster than speeches about innovation. Then came a pet project with whiskers. A free scanner shaped like a cat promised to leap from paper to screen in one gesture. Magazines printed special codes. Catalogs added symbols. Living rooms tried it. Many households decided the old habit of typing a web address was simpler than training a gadget to understand them. Privacy worries flickered too. What else might the scanner learn while you weren't looking? The idea faded without bitterness, leaving behind a good lesson about convenience. It must feel like help, not homework. The web, however, kept getting better at being a store. Next day became normal in more zip codes than anyone expected. Shoppers discovered that the best time to buy was whenever the house finally went quiet. The bell over the door could not compete with midnight, but it could compete with confusion. The counter doubled down on clarity. Phones became the main attraction by the middle of the decade, yet their math refused to be friendly. Plans changed, commissions shifted, customer patience thinned when activations stalled. The brand, which had made a living explaining the small, discovered how hard it is to explain the shifting rules of the very large. Still, good days kept arriving. A parent left with a child's first phone and a case that would survive a backpack. A retiree found a hands-free setup that made the drive home safer. A traveler grabbed a spare charger and rescued a weekend. Retail rarely needs fireworks when the right drawer opens on time. The nickname experiment at the end of the 2000s tried to compress a century into two brisk words. Giant screens linked coasts in a cheerful stunt. For a few days, headlines spelled the brand as if it had always been that short. Inside the stores, the work remained longer and kinder. A good name can wave people over. It cannot explain the difference between almost right and right. That still belonged to the person behind the counter and the shelf they knew by heart. What the decade taught, quietly, stubbornly, is that a trustworthy room can adapt its products faster than it can change its purpose. The purpose stayed the same: make modern life less fussy. Whether that meant a phone plan that matched a family or a 10-cent part that saved a Saturday, the measurement was the same smile at the door. In the dial-up years, the counter acted like a translator between two eras. A customer would bring in a tangle of cords and a slip of paper with an email address written on it, and leave with a simple splitter and the knowledge that nothing terrible would happen if they tried again. Fear often traveled further than signals. The stores shortened both distances. Training manuals from the period favored straight talk. Do not memorize features, memorize outcomes. If a person wants music in the kitchen, show them what makes that happen tonight. If they want fewer remotes, find the one that replaces 3 without a quiz. The culture rewarded clarity over cleverness. Community nights still happen, just without flyers. A clerk would spend 10 minutes showing a teenager how to crimp a connector, or a parent how to make a cable behave behind a cabinet. These were not services so much as courtesies. They built a kind of local gravity that marketing budgets can't buy. By the time a new decade turns, the store knows two truths at once. The parts wall still saves weekends with a fuse and a nod, and the phone table fills days with contracts that change more often than weather. Clerks learn to speak both languages. They fix a plug without paperwork, and then help a family choose a plan that promises to be fair. The counter becomes a small border crossing where yesterday's habits and tomorrow's expectations show passports and try to get along. Some afternoons feel like community service with a cash drawer. A person arrives with a tangle of cables and a grocery bag and leaves with 2 adapters and a calmer voice. Minutes later, someone else sits patiently while an activation screen churns through steps that only the computer understands. The line arranges itself into 2 kinds of waiting: quick solutions and long negotiations, and staff become air traffic controllers of kindness. Outside the doors, the web turns comparisons into a reflex. People read 10 reviews before lunch and want a human at 4 o'clock to confirm which opinion fits their house. The store's best answer, as always, is clarity. Here is what works. Here is what to avoid. Here's the small tip that saves you a second trip. It isn't flashy. It is valuable. The year when the numbers stop cooperating starts like any other: a bell, a greeting, the first receipt of the morning. But invoices mount, margins thin, and all the small rescues in the world can't pay mall rent that expects louder miracles. The company asks the courts for shelter so it can keep helping while it reorganizes. In the plan that follows, a new owner takes the brand's name and leases and reaches for a clever compromise. Share each room with a carrier that can draw fresh traffic while the counter keeps its promises. Where the plan lands, The door signs now carry two names. The space is split. Bright corners sell phones. The rest of the room sells solutions. Sprint's displays stand like a confident neighbor. RadioShack's drawers remember how to find an oddly specific tip without making it a production. In most places, the carrier takes a third of the floor and much of the spotlight. The arrangement buys time and saves jobs, which is not nothing. It also changes the day. Activation takes as long as activation takes, and long does not care about anyone's patience. Some people stand at the phone desk like travelers at customs, watching a status bar move in tiny quarter inches. Others weave past to pay for a bag of connectors and leave in under a minute. A good manager learns to seat people, offer a truth about timing, and keep the two kinds of errands from bumping elbows. On paper, the system should have been smooth. In practice, it felt like two businesses trying to hum in one throat. Even so, there are bright moments. A parent walks out with a child's first phone and a plan that won't surprise them. A guitarist leaves with a cable that ends the war between the pedal and the amp. A weather radio finds a porch before the storm arrives. The co-branded room keeps being useful while it learns the edges of its own compromise. The second filing arrives 2 years later, like a weather report you wanted to be wrong about. The company returns to court and chooses a smaller shape. Many of the shared stores go dark, some are sold. Independent dealers in towns that have long memories keep their lights on and order inventory with the same attention their grandparents once gave a hardware shelf. What remains is modest, stubborn, and local on purpose. People notice in passing ways. A mall walker turns a corner and finds a grate where the red letters used to glow. A thrift shop up the road ends up with pegboard and hooks from the clearance, and a home workshop gets a wall it never knew it needed. Memory spreads into smaller places the way a familiar smell does. Less visible, still persuasive. A brand with less footprint learns to be many small things instead of one large one. In cities where the sign comes down, the name survives in drawers and habits. A labeled cord, a manual kept rather than thrown out, a spare plug in a bag waiting near the door. Online, a modest storefront keeps the practical items within reach. Dealer stores become small embassies of the older tone, answer the question the customer asked, and the one they meant to ask but didn't. Then a different kind of partnership appears. Smaller, friendlier, more like neighbors sharing a porch. Inside hobby shops, where model builders and RC pilots already talk in patient sentences, a red R hangs above a tidy section of tools and parts. The new corner is called an express store, and it borrows very little drama from the past. It simply puts the right bits where tinkerers already gather. In practice, this works well because it respects walking paths people already take. A customer comes in for paint or a kit, notices heat shrink and tiny connectors under the RadioShack badge, and leaves with both. The host store likes the foot traffic. The counter inside the counter enjoys serving people who arrive, knowing exactly what Saturday asks of them. Dealer locations do their quiet work too. In towns where folks are on a first-name basis with the person behind the register, the inventory is chosen with neighborly precision. If 5 houses on Maple Street need the same weird adapter each winter, that adapter appears on a peg before the first snow. Emails from the brand point customers to these rooms as if to say, this is where the old manners live. After the headlines, the rhythm returns to normal scale. A morning shipment of cables and chargers, a box of screws that saves 5 projects, a steady trickle of gratitude disguised as small talk at the counter. The internet keeps its speed record, the store keeps its personality. The plan, imperfect as all plans are, puts the brand where it can do the most good with the least theater. In some places, the co-branded experiment lingers, still useful to families who like one-stop errands. In other places, the express corners and dealers do the lifting. Meanwhile, the website learns calm design and clear pages. Manuals are posted without making people barter for their email. The tone stays practical. The idea is the same as it was when catalogs landed on kitchen tables. Treat information as part of the product. A customer who remembers the battery card smiles at an email that offers simple help instead of coupons, shouted in capital letters. A teacher finds a listing for multimeter leads at a fair price and adds gaffer tape for the stage crew because it is easier to buy both where the page speaks plainly. The brand's second century starts to look like a different shape of the first: smaller rooms, wider reach, the same respect for time. Out at the edges of the map, a few signs still glow in storefronts where the bell's two notes sound like tradition. Inside, a drawer of RJ45 ends sits next to a bin of knobs that could have lived in 1983 and still keep their dignity in 2018. Across town, inside a hobby store, a child picks up a breadboard kit and understands that a good Saturday can be made from small parts and patience. Evenings close the way they used to, peg hooks straightened, a quick glance at low bins, a note to order the adapter that solved 3 problems in a row. The key turns. The bell gives its last polite breath. It's less of a performance than it used to be, but it's no less a service. The brand learned, again, that usefulness scales down without losing meaning. If this chapter kept you company, you can quietly tell us in the comments the smallest store you remember and the last thing it rescued. Those little stories help the next sleepy listener find their way here when they need a calm voice and a working cable. Morning will come, and with it the work of putting the right little things in the right places. The sign might be over a shared doorway, or on a small island inside another store, or at the top of a web page. The habit is the constant. Don't rush, be precise, and make sure the person who leaves knows what will happen next when they get home. The filing in 2015 turned numbers and leases into national news. But inside the rooms, it mostly turned into human decisions. Who stays, what to keep, how to keep promises with fewer hours in the day. The hedge fund that won the auction offered forgiveness on debts and a plan to share space with a carrier that could draw steady feet to the threshold. Courts approved the arrangement, even as some lenders argued for a cleaner break. The judgment favored a solution that preserved jobs and gave regulars a place to stand when they needed help. It was an unglamorous kind of mercy, exactly the kind that keeps towns functioning. Co-branding arrived with floor tape and new light boxes. 1/3 of a room became bright with phones. The rest stayed practical. Staff learned to move between scripts without sounding scripted. A person could buy a barrel tip in 90 seconds, while someone else began a long activation at the opposite counter. Privacy, long a quiet promise of the old catalog, suddenly became a headline during the bankruptcy. Regulators stepped in to make sure customer records respected the terms people had agreed to years earlier. The end result read like common sense. No sensitive data would travel where it had not been invited. The brand kept its reputation for decency when it mattered most. The second bankruptcy felt different, quicker, sharper, less theatrical. Stores closed in clusters. Some reappeared as dealer locations with the same clerks and a shorter receipt tape. Others never returned. People recognized the empty spaces for what they were, rooms that had once helped them solve something small and important, now on pause. The express corners inside hobby shops turned out to be a fit that didn't need persuasion. Model builders and RC pilots already spoke the language of specific parts. Seeing shrink tube and connectors under a familiar badge reduced the number of stops a Saturday required. The host stores gained a draw. The corner gained a purpose. Outside those corners, independent dealers kept the older mood alive. A hardware store might host a pegboard of adapters. A music shop might keep microphone plugs near the strings. The brand's red letter became a shorthand for this: we'll do what you think it will. That is a reputation you cannot buy with a campaign. Meanwhile, the website learned its manners. Product pages stopped trying to charm and aimed for clarity. Manuals were linked like handshakes. A chat bubble answered without pretending to be a personality. If you asked where the components went, the answer showed you a map to dealers before making a promise the warehouse could not keep. The co-branded rooms taught one last lesson. Two businesses can share a lease, but they should not try to share a soul. When the second filing ended the experiment in many towns, the brand was already smaller and more itself. What remained was the portable part, the tone that says, "We will help you solve the exact problem you brought in, no more and no less." In the quiet that followed, people kept finding the name in their houses, on an old multimeter that still worked, on a pair of headphones that refused to quit, on a stack of catalogs in a box labeled "Don't Throw Out." Legacy slipped out of the news and back into the rooms where it has always mattered most. After the hobby corners and dealer counters found their rhythm, the name took an online breath and tried a different pace. The site spoke quietly about parts and cables, then, in a quick turn, spoke louder about something new and hard to pin down. A group of investors gathered brand names like postcards and pointed them at the web. RadioShack's logo went with them in 2020, not as a downtown sign, but as a banner on a storefront that lived in a browser. For a time, the inventory was simple, and the promise was faster shipping than memory could offer. The next experiment arrived with the confidence of a headline and the caution of a footnote. The brand said it would help ordinary companies understand a currency that didn't live in pockets. A token appeared with a familiar nickname, and a swapping page offered a new way to trade. It was bold. It was also a world many households preferred to observe from the sidewalk. Social feeds tried a different mask, louder jokes, borrowed swagger, a hope that noise could pass for momentum. People noticed, then frowned, then looked away. Even the faithful preferred the older voice, a short sentence that fixed a long evening. Experiments have a clock. This one rang in 2023 when the rights to the name and the web address crossed a new desk. A company with stores across Latin America, Patient Retail by Nature, announced that it now owned the brand across some 70 countries, including the United States and Canada. The press note was tidy, and the plan sounded like retail again. Clarify the catalog, ship on time, keep the tone helpful. The map already knew their work. For years, they had operated RadioShack shops from San Salvador to small towns where Spanish and English both named the same screwdriver. Under their stewardship, the red logo would mean practical goods again, and the website would behave like a catalog that knows how to search. Acquisitions are paperwork. A return is a sentence. In the late summer of 2024, the sentence was simple. RadioShack was back in the United States, not as a wide chain of doors, but as an online store that understood front porches. The note mentioned a rebuilt site, a presence on the big marketplaces, and a page for other businesses that still needed dependable stock. That was enough to make the news without waking the neighbors. Packages began to travel with the old ease. Labels printed in the time it takes for a kettle to begin, delivery windows that meant what they said. The boxes did not boast. They simply arrived. Inside were things a house actually uses. Chargers that stay cool, cables that don't argue, headphones that create a little room around a tired head. The catalog leaned toward usefulness, the way it once had in the calm years of catalogs and counter talk. Headphones and desk clocks, adapters and speakers, the practical sentence-ending pieces that let other devices keep their promises. Fewer little bags of resistors, more items you could use without a toolbox. Some missed the wall of components and tidy drawers of tips. Nostalgia is a warm room. The present prefers working heat. The site made its case by being honest about what it sold and by making returns feel like a conversation instead of a hurdle. In January 2025, bright convention lights turned the logo into a landmark again. A booth stood at the edge of a noisy hall with new products that favored steadiness over spectacle. A Bluetooth speaker that didn't pout, a pair of headphones that sounded better than their price, a charger that stayed cool in its lane, even a gaming chair that looked like it knew how to behave through a long Saturday. Visitors picked things up and put them down. Staff answered 3 questions well. Does it work? Will it arrive by Friday? And what happens if it doesn't? The answers were brief, which is a kind of courtesy that booths forget when they try to be parades. Coverage from the floor carried the same message in louder fonts. The brand had become a label for useful electronics sold online, a return that respected what modern shopping actually feels like: quick, factual, and unromantic. Commentators noticed the absence of the old parts wall and did not declare it a crime. They called it a choice. The product page learned to speak plainly. Photos were tidy. Manuals were offered without requiring you to barter an email address. The little sections that once helped a novice choose a power supply now helped a parent choose the right charger for a trip. The voice of the counter, it turned out, fits inside a paragraph on a screen. Dealers in small towns kept their own lights on when it made sense. Where a hardware store hosted a narrow aisle with adapters, the red badge remained an accent that people trusted. Some days the aisle solved 3 different projects for 3 different neighbors. That felt like the brand at its best. Usefulness with a local accent. Here and there, a last old sign went dark. A mall kiosk shut for good. A strip center doorway folded its gate. The reports landed lightly because the work had already moved to screens and to corners inside other shops. The name, which once measured itself in square footage, now measured itself in promises kept by delivery dates. The second century of the brand had a different shape. Fewer walls, clearer pages, quieter certainty. A product could arrive on a Tuesday and go to work by dinner. A return could be approved without an essay. A question could be answered by a human who knew where the manual lived, even if they were continents away. People who grew up with the parts drawers learned to make peace with the accessory shelves. There is dignity in keeping a phone alive on a long day, in finding headphones that don't punish ears, in replacing the cable that refuses to help. The scale changed. The kindness didn't. A few things stayed exactly the same. A good return policy, written like it was meant for neighbors, a habit of telling the truth about what a product can't do as well as what it can, a preference for shipping a small box that solves a large annoyance instead of upselling a larger box that creates a new one. At trade shows, the team spoke about reliability more than disruption. In a room where everyone promises to reinvent the wheel, there's a market for spokes that don't bend. Reviewers said as much in January. The booth was not a museum, it was a tidy promise. A teacher buying classroom headphones wrote a brief note afterward, surprised that the order arrived with a link to a guide on keeping cords from tangling. A parent bought a charger and found a second message with a reminder about travel adapters in older houses. The site treated instructions as part of the product, which is the oldest habit the brand owns. A curious teenager asked on the help chat where the resistors went. The answer was longer than yes or no. Some dealers still carry components and will for as long as neighbors ask. The website, though, now leans into what most households need tonight. The teenager saved the link to the dealer map and the number to a grandparent who still keeps a drawer of parts. Quietly, a business-to-business page grew into a reliable door for small shops that fix things. A repair counter could order a dozen of the same cable at a price that didn't make them wince. A music store could stock microphone adapters in bulk and stop telling customers to come back next week. The company that took the brand's hand in 2023 had promised steadiness and kept it. Their countries taught them to be bilingual in patience, speak retail to families, logistics to warehouses. The U.S. relaunch in 2024 showed those manners translate. A name that once lived in 1,000 malls now lived on 1,000 doormats. The page that listed manuals without a login felt like the old counter sliding a folded set of instructions across glass. The warranty form that used short sentences felt like a clerk who'd learned to explain things to someone with a roaming toddler. The tone mattered, online as much as it did under fluorescent lights. Somewhere in the middle of the catalog, a desk clock kept good time. A pair of earbuds made bus rides less public. A speaker carried music across a kitchen floor, sticky with a day's spills. People didn't leave reviews for these things so much as they left thanks. The brand accepted both with the same politeness. A journalist called the return a label play, which is fair as labels go. The company did not argue. It said simply that a product with a known name has to behave better than one without, and then tried to make that sentence true by Friday. That is retail without speeches. Legacy became a mood more than an inventory. The wall of parts exists in memory, in dealer aisles, in old drawers that still open to reveal a magic mix of rubber feet and barrel tips. Online, legacy took the form of a tone that refuses to waste time. Both are defensible ways to honor the past. In April, a small article charted the survival of one of the last independent stores and the closing of another. The piece read like a weather report for nostalgia. The name in those towns remained a reflex word. Try RadioShack, and the reflex now pointed mostly to a website and a few reliable counters. The brand did not promise a return to 8,000 doors, promised something quieter, that the things it sold would be as dependable as the memory people had of its drawers. The most persuasive proof was in things that were not dramatic. Orders that shipped on time, pages that loaded fast, humans who replied in complete sentences. If this chapter kept your mind drifting toward sleep, you can leave a quiet note later about the last small rescue you remember. Those notes help new listeners find these calm stories when their nights ask for them. The path from crypto headlines back to cables and chargers will make sense to anyone who ever fixed a noisy radio with contact cleaner and patience. Retail remembers what works. The site now reads like the counter once sounded, brief, helpful, and certain that a small thing can save a large evening. The year moves on. The booth at the convention hall becomes a photo in a folder. The warehouse keeps its tidy corners. A customer bookmarks a manual they might need in 6 months. In these modest acts, the brand finishes its turn back to itself and keeps walking. The U.S. relaunch did not pretend to rebuild a mall map overnight. It offered something cleaner, an e-commerce page that behaved like an index and a presence on marketplaces where millions already kept tabs on errands. A short B2B form opened a different door for repair benches and small retailers who needed steady stock without a contract dance. Early reviews of the refreshed lineup read like notes left on a fridge. The cable worked, the charger stayed cool, the speaker filled a room without bragging. None of this would have made a magazine cover in 1999. In 2025, it is exactly what homes ask for. A few weeks after the winter show, product pages gained tiny improvements born from questions at the booth. A compatibility table explained power in human words. A return link moved higher on the page. The brand treated every bit of feedback as a reminder of its oldest habit, clarity first, always. Marketplace listings did their quiet job too. A recognizable badge next to a fair price reduced guesswork late at night. When buyers compared 3 similar items, the one with the familiar red name often won not by spectacle, but by not wasting anyone's time. Morning arrives the way it always does in rooms that keep promises, quietly, then completely. Somewhere a small warehouse wakes before the city and prints labels in a rhythm that sounds like rain. Parcels wait like polite travelers. The logo on each box is familiar, but the journey is new, not from a mall counter to a trunk, but from a shelf to a porch that will call it by name. A brand learns what it is the same way a person does, by noticing what remains when the noise stops. Once there were thousands of doors and a bell with two notes. Now there is a page that loads fast, a search bar that doesn't argue, and a handful of dealer counters where the old manners still live. The work underneath is unchanged. Help a device behave, make a room kinder, respect time. Shoppers have learned their own habits of calm. They compare quietly, then decide. A parent glances at a list, charger, cable, simple speakers, and orders between chores, trusting that the box will arrive before the week steals their patience. A teacher fills a cart with classroom headphones and reads a short guide about not breaking cords. An independent repair bench buys in bulk without feeling like a small customer in a loud world. The product line has learned to speak in complete sentences. A charger is not just an object, it is a promise to keep a day flowing. A desk clock is not just a device, it is a reason to be on time without alarms that sound like emergencies. Headphones are not just accessories, they are a boundary you can carry between loudness and the self you are trying to protect for an hour. In smaller towns, a dealer's aisle takes the place of a mall. The same questions arrive with different accents. Do you have the one that fits this? Will it last? What happens if it doesn't? The answers are older than any website. Yes, yes, and we'll take care of it. People leave with products and a feeling that someone invested in their evening going well. On a good Saturday, an aisle can become a map of how neighbors live. A scout leader picks up battery holders and shrink tube for a project that will teach patience by glowing. A guitarist finds a cable that finally ends the war between a pedal and an amp. A retiree chooses a weather radio before storm season turns the sky into a rumor mill. Nothing here is glamorous. Everything here is useful. The website behaves like a helpful clerk who never sleeps. It suggests the adapter that will save the second trip, but it does not insist. It offers the manual without making anyone barter for an email address. It writes dates plainly, and it tells the truth about shipping the way a good store tells the truth about whether a part is in the back right now. At trade shows, the booth has learned to smile with its whole face and not raise its voice. A visitor picks up a pair of headphones and asks a simple question. Does it sound better than it costs? The answer is yes, and the proof is in the listening rather than the adjectives. Another visitor presses the top of a charger and feels how cool it stays after a quick demo. A child sits in a gaming chair and decides it is the kind of throne that doesn't forget it belongs in a bedroom. The coverage that follows uses the words comeback and brand, which are serviceable words for magazines. Inside houses, different language applies. A return is when bedtime doesn't turn into a hunt for the right cable. A brand is what you say in a doorway when a neighbor asks who makes the one that works. The new era takes those domestic definitions seriously. Dealers keep a bulletin board of small rescues. A note from the community theater thanks the counter for a handful of rubber feet that kept a light from skating across a platform. A school writes that microphones worked for the first time in a year because someone recommended the right adapters instead of the most expensive ones. A photo shows a soccer team standing under a canopy that finally stayed tied because a manager taught knot tricks while ringing up paracord. In a different decade, this story would measure itself in store counts. In this decade, it measures itself in solved specifics. A desk that no longer hums, a tablet that no longer drops its charge, a car ride where the back seat is mercifully quiet. None of these belong in glossy ads. All of them add up to why the name matters again. Every brand has a way of taking a breath. For this one, the breath is a pause before suggesting something you truly need rather than the bigger thing that looks impressive on a receipt. The catalog is narrower by design. A shopper sees fewer rows and more clarity. Decision fatigue, which used to knock at the door by the second page, finds no welcome. Still, the past has a key to the present. The wall of components exists in memory and in a few dealer aisles where families still build as often as they buy. In basements, Labeled drawers keep a legacy alive. Screws in a film canister, heat shrink beside old instructions, a soldering iron that has earned the right to look tired. The website bows to that legacy by staying practical about what it carries and honest about where to find the rest. Some evenings, the help chat becomes a small confessional. A stranger admits they do not know the name for the thing their living room needs. The agent answers, start with what it does, not what it's called, and the conversation becomes a map. By the end, a product page and a person have found each other. The thank you is short and does more good than stars. A return arrives in the system like a sigh. The policy answers it with clarity rather than small print. Here is where to send it. Here is when the refund will land. Here is how to avoid this next time, if you want to. Respect for time, which once lived behind counters, now lives in emails written by people who understand that patience is a form of currency. The second century of the name asks less from geography and more from attention. You don't need 1,000 doors to be present. You need the habit of being reachable. The repair bench that orders on Tuesday gets Thursday's delivery. The parent who sends a question at midnight receives a reply that feels like a person on the other side of the glass. Presence, it turns out, is a tone more than a map. A soft pride runs through the new product line. It does not pretend to be rare. It intends to be ready. The private badge is an old idea made useful again. Accountability printed where you can see it, and customer service that answers without daring you to give up. When a cable fails, the response is process and apology, not theater. From time to time, an article appears about a kiosk testing a location or a dealer reopening a small room where the sign feels like a friend returning. These are experiments measured in handfuls rather than headlines. If they work, they will persist because they serve actual errands. If they don't, the website remains the dependable door that opens at all hours. People sometimes ask whether shedding components means shedding the soul. The answer is that souls do not live in SKUs. They live in habits, a fair price, a manual that tells the truth, a support reply that acknowledges you are busy. The core of the old store moves just fine through fiber and into a phone screen. The courtesy fits anywhere. On certain afternoons, the brand hears from a customer who once used a battery card as a kind of ID for belonging. The modern echo is quieter but present. A confirmation email that arrives instantly, a status update that doesn't wobble, a delivery that lands where it said it would. Belonging is when a promise keeps time. A small business writes to say that bulk orders felt humane. They did not have to phone 3 departments to make a simple change. The invoice arrived clean. The boxes matched the invoice. The work of keeping other people's work moving is not glamorous, but it is the kind of responsibility this logo has always handled well. A parent reviews a pair of headphones in 8 calm words. Better than expected, no complaints. That is the exact music of satisfaction in houses where conflict can bloom from small devices. The review goes up, not as praise, but as a data point. The page's humility looks like design because it is. Teachers trade tips in forums about which cables survive backpacks and which chargers do not run hot in older computer carts. The brand quietly reads and adjusts. Back in the warehouse, a buyer replaces a default vendor because a paragraph in a teacher's post showed its work. The result is not a press release. It's a semester without unscheduled chaos. At the edge of the map, dealer counters keep being themselves. A manager labels both ends of cords because labeling both ends prevents arguments in wiring closets. A jar on the counter collects screws rescued from packaging, free for anyone who lost one that mattered. The bell over the door, where there is one, rings the same 2 notes it learned decades ago. A journalist calls the transformation a product brand strategy. The staff nod. Names for strategies are fine in rooms where strategies are discussed. In kitchens and garages, the strategy is whether the thing works and whether you had to wrestle with ordering it. By that measure, the return is proceeding. In January, the convention hall's lights make everything look like the future, whether it is or not. The booth answers this with politeness. It does not promise reinvention, it promises delivery. Reviewers notice. The coverage uses the phrase back under new ownership and lists headphones, speakers, chargers, and desk accessories without adjectives that would embarrass anyone in 6 months. The company accepts the compliment and returns to work. Someone asks if the brand will ever again live on every corner the way it once did. The answer is that corners have changed. The modern corner is a bookmark. The modern greeting is a fast page that does not ask you to log in before you know if you're in the right place. The modern aisle is a set of filters that behave. The store exists, it simply lives where errands live now. The history will always include the part where things went sideways. There was a season when noise and social feeds tried to stand in for substance. There were filings and closures that felt like funerals for Saturday errands. The new chapter is not an erasure of that. It is a reply. It says we remember what worked, and we are doing that again with tools that match the year printed on the calendar. Legacy customers sometimes send photos of old catalogs found at yard sales. The pages look unhurried, like a good conversation. The company keeps those pictures in a folder because they are reminders of the tone to keep. If a listing today feels like those pages sounded specific, unfussy, helpful, then the long, quiet comeback is on track. At night, the site rests in a way sites do not technically do, and yet the word fits. Servers hum, caches refresh. A new image of a product replaces an older one because a photographer noticed a glare and cared. People set alarms, take earbuds from their ears, put phones on chargers that do not misbehave, and fall asleep with one fewer thing to worry about. The next morning, a manager in a small town tests a shipment the way an old manager would test a radio. Turn it on, listen for a minute, approve with a nod. A clerk tapes a handwritten tip under the glass that will save a customer 10 minutes tomorrow. The difference between the old store and the new age is not in these motions. The difference is where they point you when you need them. A brand is an agreement to behave. This one's agreement is readable. Clear pages, on-time boxes, neighbors behind counters who still know what the odd tip is called, and a tone that never tries to make you feel small for asking what a thing is named. In return, people bring their errands, which is another way of saying they bring their trust. On the site, a small banner invites businesses to open an account if they order often. The form is short. A week later, the next order ships faster because someone tightened a setting that only warehouse workers notice. The credit goes to no one in particular, which is a working definition of a mature process. A customer service rep collects thank you emails the way a clerk once collected handshakes, not because they need applause, but because the sentences teach tone. When the replies begin to sound like the old counter, brief, reassuring, exact, the team knows they are holding the line that matters. A teenager who first met the name on a parent's story has their own first errand now. They buy a cable and later a pair of earbuds for a bus ride they want to turn into a quiet lane. When asked why that brand, they shrug with accuracy because it works and gets here when it says it will. The answer is not lyrical. It is better than lyrical. It is operational. In a year or two, the details will change again. The colors, the listing photos, the mix of what people need for newer devices. The promise will not. The company has discovered that calm competes. It sets a pace that rewards clarity over volume. It writes product pages like a clerk who knows you are late for dinner. It treats returns as part of the relationship rather than the end of it. Sometimes a doorbell camera catches a delivery at dusk, and the person who lifts the box smiles because the problem it solves will not visit a second night. People share these small reliefs in quiet ways. A review that reads as expected, a message that says thank you for being normal. The brand takes these as 5-star poems and files them under Keep Doing This. Somewhere, a dealer's drawer of tips still clicks when it closes. Somewhere else, a search result opens to a page with a manual that tells the full truth and nothing but. Between these two places, an old drawer and a new page, the same idea travels. Make the modern world less fussy and more kind by caring about the small things. A store's last day is a story people like to tell. This one has had a few last days, and yet here we are, still talking about what happens next. Perhaps that is the real trick. Not to stop endings, but to keep writing beginnings that feel like help instead of announcements. If this long, quiet history kept you company tonight, you can, when you wake, leave a sentence telling us the smallest rescue you remember. It helps the next sleepy listener find a calm story on a day that needs one. More importantly, it reminds us which drawer to keep filled. In the meantime, the work continues. Orders queue, answers wait in clear language, and a name from 1921 keeps proving it can travel across new kinds of distance without losing its manners. The logo is the same. The path to the porch is different. The promise, useful, human, on time, fits both eras. Some brands need the world's attention to feel alive. This one only needs your evening to go a little better. If the cable behaves, if the headphones create just enough quiet, if the charger stays cool while you sleep, then the story is already doing its job. Morning will reward the modest. The day ends as it should, with small tools in their places, pages ready, humans off to rest, and the sense that tomorrow's problems are at a manageable size. The warehouse lights go to low, trucks wait without hurrying, a porch light clicks on. Somewhere, a box with a familiar name leans against the door, not as a surprise, but as follow-through. Before the lights go fully out, a last check happens the same way it did in the old stores. Boxes sit square, labels face forward, and the system shows no orders stranded between promises. In that small audit lives the whole philosophy: order first, then grace. It is not a dramatic creed, and that's why it survives so well. The name on the carton does not try to be a character. It tries to be a good neighbor who shows up on time. If a century of retail taught anything worth keeping, it is that usefulness is a kind of affection. You practice it until people can feel it without having to notice it. That is what the porch light is really for. So a modest box with a familiar logo can find its way to a door, and a household can keep the rest of its story moving with a little less friction.